Hey, it's Ulysses Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to Ulysses Social Studies. Today we're going to cover the end of Reconstruction, briefly through the Gilded Age, that time of rapid industrialization and urbanization in America, and we're really going to get into the meat and potatoes of this chapter, the Progressive Era, or the Progressive Movement here. What we're going to start with is the end of the Civil War leading into Reconstruction, because all of this kind of leads into the Progressive Era. After Andrew Johnson, the one-term president that was impeached, that was Lincoln's vice president, after he was president, the United States, citizens of the United States really started to lose faith in the presidency. So what do? With a big help of Southern African Americans in the South, you have President Ulysses S. Grant, former general of the Union Army. Ulysses S. Grant gets elected to presidency in 1868, re-elected in 1872. Grant, as a general, good guy. He lost his temper a lot. He was an alcoholic, and he favored his friends as generals. And really what he did is he took all of these things that he did when he was a general and brought him into the presidency, which led up to a lot of corruption in his administration. In his second term, federal officials were jailed for taking bribes from whiskey distillers. And scandals like this really opened up America's eyes. Like, oh my gosh, do our politicians really do this? Are they really corrupt? President Grant, really? The big hero of the war? Because like I said, there was a lot of good things that happened during Grant as a general and as a president. Number one, heck, he won the Civil War. He's the guy that reunited this country together. He passed 2 civil rights acts in the United States. He was a proponent for civil rights. He fought for civil rights. He was the guy who passed the 15th Amendment, giving African American men the right to vote. He even went against and he fought against the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, that white supremacy group, arrested a lot of them and really tried to banish them. So he did some good things. However, this corruption, there was about 8 big corruption cases during Grant's administration, really got the Americans going against government, going against the presidency, really starting to doubt and lose faith in the presidency, especially when Grant would try to cover these things up for his buddies. He would sit there and say, you need to investigate this, and then the next day call up and be like, nah, I think it's okay, you don't have to worry about investigating it, trying to make him look like a good guy, but then on the flip side of it saying, hey, nah, don't worry about it. So after Grant, we have a list of one-term presidents, except for one, Grover Cleveland. He's elected to one term, then not reelected, and then elected again. The only time in history that a president served 2 one-term presidencies, not back-to-back. So who do we have who's going to start to try to say, hey, I'm going to make the government and the United States good? Well, from 1877 to 1881, you have Rutherford B. Hayes. He promised a lot of radical changes, and we're going to change the government, but he was only able to make some minor reforms. And I have a feeling it probably has to do with the after effects of the great betrayal in the 1877 election. Then you have James Garfield. He was only president for 1 year. He attempted some reforms, but unfortunately for him, one day while he was waiting at the train station, he was shot and killed. He was assassinated. Then you had Chester A. Arthur. He was Garfield's vice president, and he did things like backing the Pendleton Civil Service Act in 1883 about government jobs. Then you have Grover Cleveland. He was a Democrat. Grover Cleveland said, I'm going to hire and fire government officials on your merit, what you can do, not based on your Republican or Democratic party, your political party. Say, hey, you want this job? Oh, wait, I'm a Democrat. Are you a Democrat? Okay, you can have it. No, he was like, if you're qualified for this job, I'm going to hire you. He loses his re-election bid, steps in Benjamin Harrison, who tries to help the inflation in the United States by passing the Sherman Antitrust Act, which was an attempt to break up monopolies. And then he only serves 1 term, and then you have Cleveland again, and then William McKinley. Now, it's really William McKinley who He was president during the Spanish-American War, so he really didn't have time to have any kind of corrupt politics. He avoided all these scandals, and because of McKinley, people started to really like the presidency again. They really started to have faith in the government again. McKinley won the Spanish-American War. All right. It's because of yellow journalism and people writing bad things about McKinley, which got Americans wanting to fight this war. So what happens, this is this time that we call the Progressive Era, and the Progressive Era really starts to push forward in the 1900s when you have the election of Teddy Roosevelt. But this Progressive Era is the time where the United States grappled with these problems of the Gilded Age, just rapid industrialization and urbanization, slums, cities, unskilled factory work, unsafe work conditions, and that's what the Progressive Era is all about. The Progressive Era is going to be this time where people in the United States, specifically what we call reformers, fight to make things better. These reformers were trying to make progress over the things that were wrong. So that's why it's called the Progressive Era. You're making progress, you're moving forward. Just like that picture right there, the women in a steamroller and their progress about suffrage. So we'll start with this Tammany Hall. Remember that political machine? Tammany Hall, New York City, led by boss William Tweed. He was a guy who would use bribery to stuff the ballot boxes in order to secure the vote to get the person that he wants in office, because as long as the person that he wanted was in office, then he controlled whatever happened in New York City, and he stole millions upon millions of dollars from the citizens of New York City. Well, it's the Progressive Era that aims to rid the government of these problems. And in steps a reform hero, a gentleman named Thomas Nass. Thomas Nass was a cartoonist, and he would draw cartoons about Boss Tweed in the papers and in magazines. And Tweed was furious that Thomas Nass would draw these cartoons because he knew that a great majority of Americans, especially brand new immigrants to America, they couldn't read English, but you know what they could do? They could look at a cartoon like that one that's on the screen. They could see that guy and be like, man, that's a bad dude. I don't like that guy. And it's these cartoons of Thomas Nass that really creates the downfall of William Boss Tweed. Tweed actually tries to escape the United States and escape arrest by traveling over to Europe. But even in Europe, they find these pictures of Tweed, and they're like, there's that guy. That's that bad guy right there. And he gets arrested and actually dies in jail in Europe. But that is the important part about these journalists. Like, he was called a muckraker. He was a journalist who fought for reform, and he drew these cartoons to show Americans what was wrong with government and politics in America, and let's try to fix it. So that was a good thing about what Thomas Nass did. And like I said, these progressives were reformers who worked to solve the problems caused by this rapid industrialization and urbanization. They wanted to eliminate causes of crime, disease, and poverty. They wanted to ease overcrowding in the cities, advocated for better education, just like Horace Mann of the past, promote better working conditions and fight child labor, and fight corruption in business and government, just like Thomas Nass. And I said that Thomas Nass, Mucker, these journalists who wrote about child labor, racial discrimination, slum housing, corruption in business, and they would influence voters, causing them to pressure government officials to make the change. So what kind of reform and reformers do we have, especially in the cities and in states? You have progressives that started settlement houses like Jane Addams, and we'll cover her later. You had city planners who now would help design safer building codes, open public parks like Frederick Law Olmsted did. Civil and sanitation engineers, they would improve the transportation in the cities. They would address pollution and sanitation issues, which included water disposal and clean water. Remember, these tenement buildings, no bathrooms. They would throw their waste out the window, or they would in cesspools. And because of all this cleanliness, and death rates started to drop in cities where these civil planners and engineers address all these urban problems. You had education reform, including the enactment of school attendance laws. Now you have to go to school. Susan Blow started the first public kindergarten. John Dewey, that man right there, he tried the new teaching methods that designed children to learn problem-solving skills rather than just trying to memorize dates, times, anything like that, multiplication tables. And you had Joseph McCormick, who led the American Medical Association in supporting public health laws. So you have a lot of people trying to make differences, and these people make differences in the government. So the national government was more responsive to the people and these reformers in the United States. And this was expressed through the 16th and 17th Amendments, both in 1913. The 16th Amendment was called the Gradual Income Tax. Congress could now have the power to levy or collect taxes, and it was based on your income. Basically, the more you made, the more you were taxed. And the 17th Amendment allowed for Americans to now vote for their senators. Prior to, party bosses used to choose who you and I can vote for senators, but now because of the 17th Amendment, we're making it a little bit more fair in public opinion and public voting, popular sovereignty. We can decide who are going to be our senators. Another way the government really started fighting for change and starting doing reform because of Americans was that some cities adopted this council manager for a form of government in which the professional manager ran the city, or other cities adopted a commission form of government which group of elected officials run the city. We still have that today. You have the states. This guy right here, Robert M. La Follette, he was a big guy. He challenged the power of political bosses, wanted voting reforms, spearheaded these voting reforms. This Wisconsin idea, this idea that he has, and his ideas, this Wisconsin idea decreases the power of political machine, private ballots, stuff like that. This Wisconsin idea started moving through other states. But what are the main forms of this voting reform? This ending corrupt ballot practices, adopting the secret ballot. You have these four primaries. You have these four direct initiatives for voting reform. The direct primary allows voters to choose their party candidates rather having it done by party bosses, meaning like a Republican or Democratic National Convention. You can sit there and vote who you want to run for your party. Then you have recall. Some states adopted the recall process, a special vote that gives citizens the opportunity to remove an elected official from office, unlike the impeachment, which only Congress can do. You have initiative. Some states adopted the initiative, which allows voters to propose a new law and vote on it. And you have finally referendum, which permits voters to directly approve or reject a proposed or enacted law. So you have the government starting to respond to these reformers. And one big reform that they have to attack is like OSHA, the Occupational Safety Health Administration, because of what happens here. And on March 25th, 1911, almost 150 people, mostly Jewish and Italian immigrant women, died in what we call the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire. Basically what happens is there's a bunch of women, they're working in the garment industry here, and somewhere along the line, they had a pile worth of scraps, like a garbage can worth of garment scraps, and a fire erupted from that trash can. Could have been from like a cigarette butt thrown in that trash can. And this fire erupts, and it's on the 8th story of a building in New York City. And the women can't get out. The factory owners, saying that women can't go home until their job was done, bolted the door shut. The fire escape was faulty. There was only one. They couldn't get out the door, couldn't get out the fire escape, and what happens here is these factory conditions were so bad, the fire killed almost 150 women, and these factories across America, specifically in the Northeast, see this and they're like, oh my gosh, we have to change. So in response to this Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, you have the New York State Legislature, who establishes, now get this, a 54-hour work week for women. Now today the government says you work 40 hours, and it prohibits children under the age of 14 from working, which impose new building regulations and factory safety rules in factories like the one in New York City, like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. So we're going to cover more about the progressive presidents next. We're going to cover more about ideas, but this is really what's happening in the progressive era. You have people starting to move forward, push forward, make the government do something, try to make the United States a better place.